A stillness clings to the Kuwaiti desert. Winds whisper through the dunes like forgotten voices, and the sun, high and ruthless, casts no shadow on what lies beneath. On the surface, Kuwait seems young, a 20th century nation shaped by oil and wealth. But beneath that modern skin, the genetic code of its people tells a far older story. One written not in ink or stone, but in blood. You see, Kuwait wasn't always a country. It was a passage, a harbor for caravans, a stop for pearl divers, a haven for those fleeing war, drought, or destiny. And while history remembered the names of sheiks and conquerors, it ignored the thousands who simply passed through, leaving behind no words, only children. And those children had children. And those children built the nation we now call Kuwait. But when scientists began analyzing the DNA of modern Kuwaitis, something remarkable emerged. They found not one ancestry, but three. The first group traced their roots to ancient Persia. These were the traders, the port builders, the ones who set down roots in the cities. Their DNA aligned with populations from Iran, but also carried faint echoes of European contact, French Basque and Druze lineages, intertwined through centuries of migration and intermarriage. These were not accidental strands. They were the footprints of forgotten sailors, merchants, and wanderers who once walked Kuwait's dusty coast. The second group carried the legacy of settled tribes from deep inside Arabia. City dwellers, bound by surname to centuries-old tribal networks. These were the inheritors of desert law and oral history, people who, for generations, held their identity in the strength of their bloodlines. Genetically, they formed the most endogamous cluster, tight-knit, closed, almost untouched by outside lineage. Like ancient fortresses, these genomes stood still while the world moved around them. But then came the third group, the Bedouins, and with them, the mystery. Nomads of the sand, the Bedouins were the lifeblood of Arabia long before borders were drawn. They followed no kings, built no cities. Their histories were not written in books, but sung in campfires. Yet when their DNA was finally sequenced, it shocked even the researchers. A striking 17% Sub-Saharan African ancestry. In some individuals, as high as 39%. How could this be? To answer that, we must travel back, not just through centuries, but across continents. At the southern edge of the Arabian Peninsula lies the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, just 10 miles across the Red Sea from East Africa. For millennia, this was not a barrier, but a bridge. Long before Islam, long before the spice trade, humans walked, rode, or sailed across it. Slaves, merchants, herders, refugees. They came and went, leaving behind genetic threads that now wind through Bedouin veins. This is not merely migration. This is fusion. The Bedouin genome, as revealed in the Kuwait Genome Project, sits at the crossroads of African, Asian, and European heritage. One man's DNA, sequenced at over 40x coverage, connected him to the Negev Bedouins, the Bayaka Pygmies, the Brahwi of Pakistan, and the French Basque, all within the same body. These weren't mixed families. These were mixed continents. And yet, each Kuwaiti today may belong to one of these clusters, Persian, Saudi Arabian tribal, or Bedouin, or exist somewhere in between. Their surnames may align with their ancestry, but not always. Some families straddle categories. Others hide origins long erased by social mobility, shame, or the politics of identity. And that raises the real question. If our blood tells a different story than our name, then which is true? Maybe both, or maybe neither. Because Kuwait, as it turns out, isn't just a country. It's a layered memory of empires and exoduses, of strangers becoming neighbors, of tribes becoming citizens. And in the end, its DNA doesn't divide the people. It reveals the depth of what they've shared. They move like wind, sleep beneath stars, and leave behind no cities, only stories carried in blood. For centuries, the Bedouins of Kuwait were seen as the purest reflection of Arabian identity. The tent dwellers, the desert's original children. But science, with its cold precision, has revealed something far more complex and far more human. When a single Bedouin genome was sequenced, not a myth, not a legend, but a real man, 20 years old, Yemeni ancestry, born in Kuwait, his DNA did not point to one tribe or one land. It pointed in every direction at once. His Y chromosome, J1E, also called JAP58, marked him as a son of Arabia. That wasn't surprising. It's a common male lineage across the peninsula, especially among tribes in Saudi Arabia, Yemen, and the Negev. In fact, over 60% of Bedouin men in the region carry this paternal signature. A proud, ancient line. That much made sense. But then came the shock. His mitochondrial DNA, his maternal lineage, belonged to a rare subclade called L3D1A1A. A line not from Arabia, but from deep within West Central Africa. The same lineage found among the Fulani, the Chadians, and even the Akan people of Ghana. A maternal echo carried not by camels, but by slave ships, trade routes, and silent suffering. How did this African motherline reach a Bedouin camp in the heart of Arabia? To answer that, we have to look beyond borders. Look toward the Red Sea, where Africa and Arabia almost touch, separated by nothing but 20 miles of shifting water. For thousands of years, that narrow crossing wasn't a barrier. It was a bridge. And on that bridge, people moved, willingly or by force, long before the world wrote down who belonged where. The Bedouin genome, then, becomes a paradox. It carries the pride of tribal Arabia, but also the pain of displacement. It remembers both the desert and the jungle, both migration and marginalization. And this isn't an isolated case. Kuwaiti Bedouins, as a genetic group, carry an average of 17% Sub-Saharan African ancestry. Not incidental, not occasional. This signal is consistent, seen across genomes, confirmed by principal component analysis, and matched against data from East African and Near Eastern populations. These aren't statistical errors. They're genetic footprints left by generations of Africans who crossed into Arabia, became part of tribes, and were absorbed into family lines, but never written into official history. Some of them came through slavery, others through trade, others through centuries of human movement that had no political labels. But the DNA remembers. What makes the Bedouin story more fascinating is that, despite their genetic diversity, Bedouin identity has long been treated as singular, pure, untouched. In fact, cultural traditions of cousin marriage, aimed at preserving lineage and land, have created a high prevalence of inherited disorders among Bedouin families. It's a cruel irony, trying to preserve a pure bloodline that was never pure to begin with. Their DNA tells a story of openness, of crossings, of complexity. And still, in Kuwaiti society, Bedouins often stand at the margins. Their surnames can carry social weight. Their tribal affiliations can impact citizenship, marriage, and opportunity. Some Bedouin individuals today even hide their ancestry, choosing silence over stigma. That silence, too, becomes part of the paradox. And yet, genetically, the Bedouins are the most diverse group within Kuwait. Structure analyses show they don't just share ancestry with other Arabs, they branch outward, overlapping with African, Asian, and even European populations. Their genomes have lower linkage disequilibrium, meaning more historical recombination, more mixing. A biological record of centuries of human exchange. In fact, when you place a Bedouin genome in a global map of genetic variation, alongside the French, the Brahui, the Druze, the Pygmies, it doesn't sit quietly in one corner. It stretches across them all. A bridge once again. This makes the Bedouin paradox not a contradiction, but a key. A key to understanding how migration, isolation, identity, and memory all live inside ourselves. A key to rewriting what we thought we knew about ancestry. And a key to humbling ourselves in front of the truth that no one is ever truly of one place. Because the desert didn't create the Bedouins. The world did. And if we really listen to their DNA, we don't just learn about them. We learn about ourselves. In the heart of the Arabian Peninsula, love has never been just about the heart. For centuries, marriage wasn't a personal decision, it was a strategy, a shield, a survival tactic forged under the desert sun. Among Kuwaiti tribes, especially those rooted in Bedouin and city-dwelling traditions, unions were rarely made between strangers. Instead, they were drawn from within, cousin marrying cousin, lineage looping back into itself like an echo trying not to fade. On the surface, it looked like loyalty, but under a microscope, it revealed something else entirely. DNA doesn't keep secrets. And when scientists looked into the genomes of hundreds of Kuwaitis, a pattern emerged, silent, striking, and dangerous. Runs of homozygosity, long stretches in the genome where both copies of a gene are identical. These aren't just numbers. These are genetic fingerprints of consanguinity, marriages between close relatives, passed down for generations. And in Kuwait, especially in the subgroup tied to Saudi tribal ancestry, the numbers are among the highest in the world. 1 out of every 2 marriages in Kuwait is between blood relatives. In some families, it's more than tradition, it's expectation. But the consequences don't wait for permission. Hidden within these intertwined genomes are ticking clocks, recessive mutations. On their own, harmless. Carried silently by parents, never causing illness. But when both mother and father carry the same mutation, their child is no escape. The result? A heartbreaking rise in inherited diseases. Disorders that sound rare elsewhere, like spinal muscular atrophy, Bardet-Biedl syndrome, or severe metabolic errors, become painfully common in clinics across the Gulf. Children born with challenges science still struggles to treat. Parents forced to face a truth they were never taught to question. And this is not a story limited to one group. While the Bedouin subgroup shows more genetic diversity due to historic admixture, even they're not immune. In fact, the tribal culture that once shielded identity now risks becoming the very source of vulnerability. It's not just about disease. It's about genetic bottlenecks, when a population shrinks inward instead of expanding. The loss of variation. The loss of resilience. Like a tree with tangled roots, unable to grow new branches. But here's the paradox. The same customs that increase risk also strengthen bonds. In these tightly woven communities, family is everything. Honor, trust, legacy, all passed down through shared names and shared blood. To question that tradition isn't just scientific. It's emotional, political, even spiritual. So what happens when modern genetics collides with centuries of cultural continuity? Some resist, others adapt. Across Kuwait, a slow shift is underway. Genetic counseling programs have begun offering premarital screening, not to shame couples, but to inform them, to give them the chance to see what lies beneath their shared surname. And in many cases, love still wins. Couples choose to marry, knowing the risks, but also knowing they are more than their genes. But knowledge brings choice, and choice brings change. Still, one question lingers in the shadows. How do you untangle a pattern that was never meant to be broken? Because for generations, marriage was the rope that held families together. Now, it's also the thread that reveals how fragile that rope has become. As science peels back the layers of Kuwait's genetic fabric, it reveals not just medical truths, but emotional wounds. Traditions that brought pride, now linked to pain. Practices meant to preserve the past, now threatening the future. But perhaps the real burden isn't in the genes. It's in the silence that surrounds them. Sometimes, the past doesn't whisper. It hides. Not in ruins, not in books, but in alleles, passed from parent to child like coded fragments of history. And when scientists finally decoded those fragments inside the people of Kuwait, they found something no map had marked. A network of ancestry that wasn't loud, wasn't obvious, but it was everywhere. This is the story of a population built on crossroads, of a genetic puzzle where no piece fits neatly, and no edge is clearly defined. When the genomes of hundreds of Kuwaitis were studied, not from memory, but from measurable data, researchers expected 3 clusters, and they found them. Persian descent, Arabian tribal, nomadic Bedouin. That part made sense. But inside each cluster, something deeper stirred. Traces of people long gone. Admixtures from places that were never part of Kuwait's official origin story. In the Persian ancestry group, called Kuwait P, the DNA didn't just point toward Iran. It extended further, into Europe, and back into South Asia. Lineages connected to the Druze, the Brahui, and even the Kalash people, isolated mountain dwellers of northern Pakistan. What linked them to Kuwait? Trade? War? Migration? Or perhaps just time? Doing what time always does, blurring boundaries. In the Saudi tribe group, Kuwaitis, the connection was unmistakably Arabian. Their genomes bore the imprint of Negev Bedouins, a mirror held up to the heart of the desert. But alongside that, A quiet signal pulsed, the Mediterranean. Tiny fragments of DNA shared with populations along the eastern shores of Europe. A reflection of past contact, long before oil or borders. And in the Bedouin cluster, Kuwait B, the picture was even more complex, because these were not just desert wanderers. Their genomes carried imprints from Sub-Saharan Africa, yes, but also from Europe and Central Asia, a fusion of far-flung histories, woven so tightly into the genetic code that even the people themselves had no idea where their ancestors once stood. Structure analysis revealed it visually, bars of color representing genetic input from different regions. But the real power wasn't in the graph. It was in the implication. No one is unmixed. Not in Kuwait. Not anywhere. Genetic studies compared Kuwaiti DNA to data from the Human Genome Diversity Project. And what emerged was startling. Each group, whether Persian, Arab, or Bedouin, contained hidden threads from at least 6 ancestral populations. Bedouins shared markers with the Bayaka Pygmies. City tribes aligned with European French. Persians carried links to West Asian highland clans. And yet, most Kuwaitis identified only with one label. One group. One origin. That disconnect between what people believe and what their blood says is the real silence of admixture. But silence doesn't mean absence. It means forgetting. For generations, these mixtures happened through war, love, captivity, migration, survival. They weren't recorded, but they were inherited. And today, as Kuwait confronts rising health challenges, from obesity to diabetes to rare genetic conditions, scientists are realizing something critical. Understanding these silent admixtures isn't about identity. It's about biology. Because genes don't follow flags. And medicine can't afford mythology. In one genome, you might find a mutation common in Europe, buried next to one from the Horn of Africa. In another, a rare variant typical of Central Asia, silently influencing how a person responds to insulin. These aren't anomalies. They're evidence. Evidence that Kuwait isn't an island, but a vessel. Evidence that the faces walking the malls of Salmiya and the souks of Jara might carry within them the legacies of slaves, sailors, nomads, and priests. And the deeper you go, the more the borders blur. That's the beauty of admixture. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand to be known. It just waits, inside cells, inside chromosomes, until someone listens. And when they do, a new map emerges. One not built on territory, but on time. It began with a bang. June 26, 2015. A suicide bomber walked into the Imam Sadiq Mosque during Friday prayers and detonated himself. 27 dead. Over 200 wounded. A nation left trembling. But what followed was even more explosive, not with fire, but with policy. In the aftermath, Kuwait passed one of the most radical laws the modern world had ever seen. Law number 78 of 2015. A mandate that every citizen, resident, and even visitor would be required to submit their DNA to the state. A complete national genetic registry. Imagine that. Crossing into Kuwait and handing over your genome at the border. The rationale was national security. The promise, a safer future. Faster investigations. Better crime solving. DNA as a digital fingerprint. Infallible, efficient, final. But for many, it wasn't just a safety measure. It was surveillance wrapped in science. For the first time in history, an entire country tried to legislate biology, to convert flesh into a barcode. And behind the official reasoning, something more unsettling loomed. Because in Kuwait, identity isn't just personal, it's tribal. It's genealogical. Entire lineages trace their legitimacy through bloodlines. And with one cheek swab, those lines could be questioned, challenged, erased. This wasn't theory. It happened. In the months that followed, DNA testing quietly began to unearth cases of citizenship fraud, individuals who had fabricated lineage documents to gain the prized status of Kuwaiti nationality. One case exposed a man who had falsely registered 3 of his brothers as his sons. Those 3, in turn, had granted citizenship to over 43 more individuals under that fake family tree. All of it collapsed under the scrutiny of DNA. And just like that, 164 people lost their citizenship, including children and grandchildren, stripped of their legal existence because of a molecule. No trial, no jury, just genetic evidence. But is DNA really justice? That question ignited a firestorm across legal, ethical, and international lines. Human Rights Watch, Gene Watch UK, and the United Nations condemned the law. They called it excessive, disproportionate, a violation of privacy that turned every citizen into a suspect. Because DNA doesn't just tell the state who you are. It tells them who you come from, who you could become, what risks you carry, what secrets your ancestors left in you. And once that information is in a database, who controls it? Could your genome be used to deny you a job, block a marriage, silence your voice? That's not science fiction. That's policy waiting for precedent. Even Kuwait's own constitutional court couldn't ignore the implications. In 2017, it struck down the law. Final, irrevocable. Article 30 of the Kuwaiti Constitution, it ruled, guaranteed personal liberty and privacy, even in the face of fear. And just like that, the world's first mandatory DNA law died. But the questions it raised are still very much alive. What is identity in an age where DNA can be digitized, stored, and sorted? How do nations balance the real threat of terrorism with the even deeper threat of erasing civil liberties? And what happens when the state doesn't just track your behavior, it owns your biology? For Kuwait, the experiment was short-lived. But the precedent is on the books. The idea exists. And in a world rapidly embracing biometrics, facial recognition, and predictive algorithms, the genome is the final frontier. What makes this even more haunting is that in a place like Kuwait, where belonging is everything, DNA has become both key and cage. It can confirm your roots. It can erase your family. It can grant you a passport. It can turn you into an outsider overnight. This isn't just science. This is sovereignty. And in that space between data and law, truth and power, something deeply human is being decided. Not by history, not by memory, but by blood. In most countries, borders are drawn on land. In Kuwait, sometimes they're drawn in blood. For decades, citizenship here has been more than paperwork. It's heritage. It's tribe. It's the weight of a name stretching back centuries. But what if one swab, one line of genetic code, could redraw those lines in an instant? This isn't a metaphor. It's happening. Behind closed offices and ministry doors, the state has begun quietly verifying lineage claims with DNA. Not as a tool of curiosity, but as a test of belonging. One man registers his brothers as his sons. Another builds an entire branch of fictitious relatives to gain state benefits. Entire family trees that look legitimate on paper, until their genes told a different story. And just like that, citizenship becomes conditional. Not on your loyalty, not on your life lived here, but on the molecular truth of your ancestry. For many Kuwaitis, this is more than a legal shift. It's an existential threat, because in a country where being original, asli, often defines your status, access, and identity, DNA becomes not just proof, but judgment. Suddenly, a surname isn't enough. Legacy isn't enough. Your presence, your contribution, your generations here, all can be questioned if your blood doesn't align with expectation. The irony, that very blood, according to population genetic studies, is already deeply mixed. Science has shown that Kuwait's population, whether Persian-rooted, Saudi tribal, or Bedouin, is a genetic mosaic. People who consider themselves pure often carry lineages from Africa, Europe, and Central Asia. Some harbor rare mutations linked to regions they've never set foot in. Some have ancestors erased by silence. Yet here we are, reducing identity to a binary, match or mismatch, citizen or fraud, inside or out. And in this process, families are being shattered. One ruling revokes the citizenship of 164 individuals, not for any crime, but for carrying genes that exposed a lie they didn't even know existed. Grandchildren stripped of a nationality they were born into. Children made stateless because their great-grandfather took a shortcut in a bureaucratic system. No trial, no nuance, just a cold verdict encoded in nucleotides. This is where bloodline becomes borderline, because the real border isn't just between tribes or surnames. It's between who you think you are and what your DNA reveals. It's the invisible fault line between legal belonging and biological truth. But that truth is messy. A genome doesn't recognize flags. It doesn't speak Arabic or Persian or Swahili. It simply remembers. Every migration, every union, every secret love story, and every forced separation. And sometimes, it remembers what we were never told. The state uses DNA to define who counts, but the genome doesn't play by political rules. It tells us that purity is a myth, that every identity is a mixture, that every nation is, in some way, built on contradiction. So what do we do now? Do we continue policing ancestry, drawing harder lines around names and genomes? Or do we embrace what science already knows? That identity is more than biology. The answer may shape not just Kuwait's future, but the future of all nations grappling with citizenship in the age of genetic surveillance. Because in a world where your blood can confirm or condemn, the question isn't just who you are, it's who gets to decide.